Okay, let's begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of thy faithful, and enkindle them with the fire of thy love. Send forth thy Spirit, and they shall be created. And thou shalt renew the face of the earth. Let us pray. O God, who didst instruct the hearts of thy faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant us in that same Spirit to be truly wise, and ever to rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. I'd like to thank everybody for attending our inaugural Tutor Talk of the Year. Our speaker today will be Dr. Richard Ferrier. Dr. Ferrier is an alumnus of St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. He received his PhD from the University of Indiana in the history of science. He's been a tutor at Thomas Aquinas College since 1978. He was a visiting tutor at St. John's College in the year 1984-1985. I remember how I was a sophomore that year, how sad I was that he was not there for my sophomore year, and how glad I was he came back to be my junior mathematics tutor.
I remember you from that class.
That was a great class. I loved it. So please welcome Dr. Richard Ferrier.
I have too much to say, and I am going to rely on God's advice to Moses. Just be brave, and I'll tell you what to say. Now, I don't have Aaron to help me out, but in any event, I'll do it solo with the help of the Lord. And this time, last time I gave a tutor talk, I had some gestures and even postures in mind, so I wandered away from the podium, and it became an enormously difficult task to produce a transcript, and in parts even to hear on the audio what I had said. I'm resolved not to let that happen this time. So with that, I'm going to start quite personally and in the present. I am writing for the Aquinas Review an article, kind of a longish article and it's a book review, and it's a book review of the now dead Generalissimo, the head of nationalist China in the first half of the 20th century, most of it. His regime, was defeated by the communists, and they went to Formosa, now called Taiwan, and the Taiwanese independent regime is the descendant of his forces and his political movement. Let me tell you a story right away. Okay. Actually, I'm going to ask you a question. Have you ever heard of the Jian incident in 1936? After I tell you what happened, I want you to think, is it astonishing that I don't know that? Why don't I know that? In the mid to late 30s, the war, World War II, in a way had already begun. It had begun with the Japanese taking over the rich industrial, also terrible weather, province of Manchuria and setting up a puppet government. And there were clashes between Chinese military forces. China wasn't very unified. The official government was the Nationalist Party of Chiang Kai-shek. On and off in that period, with much loss of life. At the same time, Chiang Kai-shek had decided, against his somewhat socialist principles, or it's hard to characterize his political stance when he was the head of that movement. It had strong element of moral reform in it. There was an awful lot of corruption in China. We call it corruption and turn up our noses at it. It's kind of an inherited system of favors and bribes, which, am I already a cultural relativist? Has history poisoned my mind? Which was more or less accepted. And in any event, it was those were the cards he had to play. He had to buy off, bribe, pacify, keep in line independent governors who had their own armies. He did a pretty good job of that. And the regime was in the best condition it had ever been in the late 30s, mid-30s. That's the time they made Nanking the capital, and it was a modern city, beautiful city. China came out of the Great Depression faster than we did. In fact, almost everybody did. One of the things that you might consider if you study that period in history is whether FDR and the New Deal actually prolonged the Depression or made things better. That's a disputed question among historians, and if anything, I think that consensus is tending towards he prolonged it. And by the way, Hoover started the policies that did prolong it. They tended to be insistence on high wages, not letting a recession play itself out, and various government interventions. I will not say more about that, but I can commend it as a subject to your study, especially to the tutors. There are only a few here, but to you all, you should look into that. And the reason is, FDR's having gotten us out of the Depression is a great, powerful, atmospheric opinion in American politics, and it's less important now than it was. Other issues have dominated our politics, other issues than the economic ones. I think so anyway, and I think they should. I think we have deeper questions to face than management, labor, capital labor problems. And it's very antiquated to imagine that, as James Carville, you know who James Carville is, he was an advisor to Bill Clinton, a political advisor, funny looking guy, bald with a kind of narrow skull. His nickname is Lizard Head. He's the guy who came up with the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid," to explain all of our elections. Now, there's some truth to that, but it's much less the case now, I think. So anyway, I'm the Xi, I want to call it. Somebody tells me G, I should call it. Jian incident is this. One of those factions that was at play in China was the Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party. And Chiang, the reason I told you that he was a sort of kind of a nationalist socialist, not a Nazi, in favor of a strong central government. You can see why he had to be, with these warlords practically ruling provinces that he couldn't get to cooperate or couldn't command exactly. China was coming into the modern age, and it did not have established democratic or republican traditions. But it did have a long past of some kind of greatness. And those things combined to produce a kind of desire for a powerful central government to reflect the greatness of the people and its history. Anyway, so he's fighting the communists and winning. And I mean really seriously winning. He's surrounding them and starving them out. Now both sides are very violent. They're executions and the dark things that happen in history. And he's got them on the ropes. His forces outnumber them in total numbers by like 100 to 1 or something like that. His forces are not unified. It's this patchwork quilt of this Manchurian warlord and this guy from Canton and that sort of thing. The Japanese, meantime, have turned sharply militaristic. They've abrogated the naval treaty that restricted the size of the world's navies and started building a first-class fleet. That was done in the 20s, 30, maybe 1930, 31. These are the aircraft carriers that carry the planes that bomb Pearl Harbor. And the torpedoes that are on those airplanes, on the torpedo planes, they're built in this period, and they're superior to ours. You want to know where they're built? I'm sure you do. Nagasaki. Anyway, some Chinese patriots, intelligent people, want Chiang to stop finishing off Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong and the communists, and to get a united front against Japan. And in fact, the next year, in 1937, the Japanese will initiate full-scale war with the Chinese in the Battle of Shanghai, 1937. That's the date you really want to start the Second World War, is when Japan wasn't just skirmishing on the border, but actually invaded China. I mean, they'd already taken Manchuria, but, well, let that pass. It's in the far northeast. You can sort of say, I don't know. People have had interest in Manchuria. The Russians did, other people did. But in any event, when you hit Shanghai and then go up the Yangtze River, you're at war. And in fact, the following year, the Japanese declared, after 37, they declared they didn't even recognize the government of Chiang Kai-shek, and they had nobody to negotiate with. Chiang Kai-shek is doing the most astonishing balancing act I have ever read about a statesman doing. He has so many things to deal with. And one of them is these warlords. They happen to be from Manchuria, but they'd been driven out, and they're supposedly on his side. He's planning a final campaign against the communists. I can't tell you how close communist China came to never happening. And the year is 1936, when it came close to never happening. But these other Chinese, I won't try to pronounce or give you the names, and I might not even be able to recall them, want to pressure Chiang Kai-shek into negotiating a unified front with the communists. On December 12th, 1936, they kill his bodyguard and kidnap him. He's the head of the Chinese government. This is in a Chinese city. He's gone up to have talks with people in Chinese politics, and they kidnap him. He scrambles over a wall, badly injures his back, hides in a cave, and they come and find him. They come and find him. Mao has got word of this. He and his associates are in their headquarters giggling about it, saying they should kill him. Of all people, Stalin comes to his rescue. And Stalin's reason is this. Stalin is a numbers guy, besides being one of the nastiest people in world history. And he can count the numbers. A strong China will tie down Japanese troops in case the Japanese want to attack the Soviet Union. And they have joined an international pact called the Anti-Comintern Pact. Comintern is Communist International. It's the International. If you've ever seen Red October, that's the anthem of the Comintern. It's the international organization to spread Bolshevism over the globe. And Italy and Japan and Germany are members. They become members. Stalin, when he's looking at the cards he has to play, he says, well, I don't have anybody. Nobody's allied with me. And besides, I'm just now conducting purges of my army and destroy about half the experienced officers. And the Japanese are looking good. They've taken Manchuria, they're growing, and the government is militaristic, strongly militaristic, right? And now they're in the Comintern pack. I need a counterweight to China. I mean, not to China, to Japan. And where do I look? China. Chiang Kai-shek has like 1.5 million men or something, of whom maybe 500,000 are loyal, or securely loyal. In fact, he might have more than that, but anyway. And Mao has nothing. So he sends the word via his his sub-thug in China, to Mao and says, shut up, get out of my face. You're not going to do that. And he in fact provides some military help for Chiang in the following years. Soviet advisors, Soviet aircraft. Now, the aircraft in the 30s are mostly biplanes, and you don't imagine that they're Mustang fighters or B-17s or something. But the Soviet aircraft was pretty good, and they had a lot of it. Good for the times. So they negotiate an arrangement because Mao has been told to shut his mouth. And the day after Christmas, Chiang is released. It's a much more complicated story than that. It would make a great movie. It's just an incredible movie. And part of the deal is that he's going to stop attacking the Communist Party in China. You can date the beginning of the growth of the Chinese Communist Party to full dictatorship and command of China from that date. Now, it's not the only cause. There are many causes, but it's dramatic. It's super important, and people on Taiwan know about it. If you look up, it's XI-AN incident. It's called the kidnapping of Chiang Kai-shek. You can find some really ferocious Taiwanese propaganda videos on YouTube in which they lay this out and make the case that they'll call them traitors, who abducted the head of their government. One of them actually was finally executed by the nationalists, and the other was in a kind of exile, internal exile, became a Christian, visited the U.S., and declared afterwards, I made a terrible mistake. I'm a sinner. Now, this takes, maybe if you poke around, look at a couple, 3 videos, an hour and a half of your time on YouTube, and I've already taken up too much of your time right now with it. But who can deny the importance of what has been going on in China in our times? Right now, to this day, right? It might be useful to know something about that. It might be instructive with respect to large power politics. I mean, think about Stalin coming out against Mao. Now, he gets for Mao a reprieve, and that leads to the chance of the Communist Party to begin to grow. The war is carried out by the nationalists. That's about 90% true. The Japanese are not fighting the communists hardly. As it goes on, the war now, I'm thinking about from 37 all the way to 45, to the surrender of the Japanese. As the war goes on, the Chinese Communist Party does play more of a part. But the heavy lifting is done from the beginning by Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists. He is a fascinating man. And I recommend this book to anybody who wants to read it. It's called The Generalissimo by Jay Taylor. And one of the fun things about it is this, and this is an instructive thing. Jay Taylor was an experienced diplomat and had a long career in the State Department. And he swallowed hook, line, and sinker that Mao was more appealing to the Chinese, and that Chiang Kai-shek was corrupt and incompetent and yada, yada, yada. The story that we told ourselves at the end of World War II when we stopped supporting him. The Chinese archives have been opened since about 2000, between 2000 and 2010, not all of them. But documents are available to historians now so that you can rewrite the history of the Japanese-Chinese War. And when you do, it completely explodes the standard American anti-Chiang, Chiang was no good narrative. Just tears it to pieces. And now it doesn't say that Chiang was perfect, but so there's a whole new understanding of what happened in China that's available now, and the books that are being written about it now. Now this is Chinese or Japanese archives. You need translators. Most American historians don't know those languages. It's a long, painstaking work. But as they do accumulate it, the next layer of historians, the synthesizers, who are broadly read and have their eye on the big picture, incorporate those things. There is, opening to our times, now I want to speak to the students, and especially to your generation, a vast panorama of history that not only we did not know in the West, and it was contentious in America after the war. Now this is long before your time. I'm born in 1948. Anybody hear of Joe McCarthy? Not many. George Marshall? Not many. Richard Nixon? The so-called Red Scare after that Joe McCarthy led. This was, you should know your own country's history. Nixon made his career out of investigating communist influence in the United States. And I'll be gentle to them. My own father-in-law is one of them. The sentimental progressives saw in the communists, I don't know, friends of the people, people standing up against corrupt people, generals and fascists and one thing and another. In effect, put a blanket of silence or condemnation or both over the investigations into the influence of the Stalin-led international communist movement in the United States in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and into the 60s. The Soviet archives being opened after the fall of the Soviet Union gave us some of that information. Us, who is us? Readers, citizens, historians? Let me kind of turn to that aspect of things and make the talk a little more general. So we will leave the Asia-Pacific War, and that's what it ought to be called. It is not World War II in the Pacific. That's the California perspective. That's my people who I'm a fifth-generation Californian. That's my people who had to put up blackout curtains on their windows in the Bay Area because they were afraid we'd be bombed next after Pearl Harbor. And in fact, there were some lame attempts to drop bombs from balloons and whatnot. There was a massive display of anti-aircraft fire over Los Angeles. There was a supposed spotting of Japanese aircraft. I don't know what it was, a blimp, a cloud, something. And so what is that war to us? Now again, I'm talking to the students. What is it to you? What do you know about it? Everybody knows the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, right? I almost want to say, then what? Do any of these names, which are names in my childhood, they were on television in things called, what was called Victory at Sea, a series of documentaries about World War II. Richard Rogers, I think, of Rogers and Hammerstein, did the music for that. There's a War at Sea overture and film score. My father, God rest his soul, brought home a samurai sword. He was on a minesweeper in Tokyo Bay. We are practically on the anniversary of this, when the Japanese surrendered. And somehow or other he got a samurai sword as a token of some kind. It came his way. We had it in our basement for years and years and years. So you may know about Midway, the Battle of Midway. The recent film on it is very good, by the way, historically good. It's not perfect, but it's very good. Guadalcanal? I'm seeing some nodding yes. Yeah, okay. So that for us is the war, the Pacific War. MacArthur striding through the surf, you know, he had said, "I shall return," and now he returns. You know, they shot that several times in order to make it look good. But MacArthur was the best PR agent in the war. He had an extraordinary talent for maximizing his accomplishments and minimizing his stupidities. Yeah, okay, so the recovery of the Philippines, and then of course, everybody knows this, we dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima and then one on Nagasaki. And we all feel guilty and bad about that, but fortunately somehow the Japanese came to like us anyway, end of story. Right. Do you know when the first strategic bombing of a city aimed at civilians, not a city that was close to the front where you could say, well, they were bombing the supply lines close to the battle lines, but long-range bombing of a city was in World War II? I didn't know this until a few years ago. Chongqing, China. After Nanking fell to the Japanese, Chiang did the scorched earth, trade space for time strategy, and removed the government to Chongqing. Now, Chongqing is like Nowheresville. It wasn't a big city. They had thousands, hundreds of thousands of refugees there. And the Japanese, in 1938, before the invasion of Poland, before Europeans like to say World War II started with the invasion of Poland, bosh. The strategic bombing against cities, which is another thing we're made to feel guilty about, they try to make us feel guilty about it, started with Chinese in 1938, and it went on for about a year and a half, and the number of dead, almost entirely civilians, was over 20,000. They didn't have the same quality bombers that Air Forces had later, but that's a lot of people. At one point it went on, I think, for 62 days straight. People suffocated in bomb shelters. It was truly horrible. If you read a condemnation of the barbarous warfare in the December 1940, is that 40 or 41, early in the 40s, by the then Pope, and you imagine that he's talking about the firebombing of Dresden, you are wrong. The barbarous behavior of the Japanese in China was on everybody's mind first, and the Polish invasion second. There is no papal condemnation of strategic bombing after the war with Germany begins. No direct condemnation at all. Well, there's a thing maybe you didn't know too. There's so much you didn't know, but there's so much I didn't know either. I want to say I understand your position. I've been in your shoes for a long time. Okay, so that I'm going to use up all my time in introductions, which is terrible. But anyway, you can ask me questions. What I'll do next now is say a little more about my interest in history. It was my first intellectual interest. Is that because my father was on a subtender is what he was on, in World War II, and brought home a samurai sword? Is it because of what we saw on television? I don't know. Boys like to think about war. My uncle was in the breakout at Normandy. His unit was bombed with, as they say, friendly fire by a box formation of heavy bombers in the Saint-Lô breakout. I say these things, and I think, does anybody remember the Saint-Lô breakout? Does anybody remember how hard it was after we got on the beaches in Normandy to get the next 20 miles? It was almost impossible. There's a country with, it's called bocage. They have farm lanes with hedges on the side, like from the time of the Norman conquest or something. So the roads get worn down and the hedges grow up, and they're in effect trench lines dividing the farm properties. Mr. Appleby's been there. Are they still there? Have you seen those? Yeah. They had to make special equipment on the tanks to cut through the hedges, and the tank had to come up from a ditch. Do you think a tank is well armored on the bottom? No. So they did a big strategic attack with bombers, and they missed. And my uncle was a doctor. He was a surgeon. His division was the 30th Division. His commander was General McNair. McNair was killed. A general. You don't lose a lot of generals. We don't anyway, in World War II. But McNair was killed by the bombing, and my uncle came out of the little foxholes. They didn't expect to be hit. They were getting ready to advance. But anyway, they took what cover they could. He came out and treated the wounded on the field. They didn't talk about it much in my family, but we knew about it. They gave him the Silver Star. That's the second highest honor the U.S. Army gives. The next one above is the Congressional Medal of Honor. I have a certain amount of trouble with people sneering at the behavior of the American Republic and its armed forces in World War II. I'll just confess that. And I feel the same way about the Canadians and the Brits. And I have pity for them all. We went to Europe only once in 1976, my wife and I, and we visited. I want to say the town, and I don't think you'll know it. Bastogne. If you've seen Band of Brothers, you know what Bastogne is. It's close to that my uncle delivered his first baby. He was a surgeon, but midwives came up saying, "Wir müssen Doktor haben." We need a doctor. So they pulled him out. German lady's giving birth to a baby, and there's several midwives there. My Uncle Phil. So we went to Bastogne. We rented a little car. It was a terrible car. You could see this. You could see the highway. The front door didn't quite match the body. I think it was a Renault. It was a French car in any event. It wasn't a German car, I'll tell you that. And not even a Volkswagen. And we did that instead of taking all these tours, you know. So we drove. I went to Waterloo. We stayed in a bed and breakfast at Mont Saint-Jean, just near Waterloo. That's the French call it that sometimes. The Battle of Mont Saint-Jean. That's the French village, or Belgian French-speaking village there. When I was in Bastogne, as we drove into the center of town, there's a circle, kind of civic center, and there's a pedestal. I hope it's still like this. And there's a Sherman tank on it with the white U.S. Army star, 5 points. I almost broke out in tears. They remember, and in Belgium, they remember and they're grateful. There's a monument outside of town. It's the weirdest looking monument. From ground level, you look at it, it's just a bunch of pillars, but they're not all in a line. If you look more closely, you'll see the line goes like, it's our star. There's a walk on the top of it, and they have little bas-relief maps, and you can, and with arrows, you say that's where the 99th Infantry and the 2nd Infantry held off the 1st Panzer Division. It was the 12th, I think, SS Panzer, and so on. You could stand there and look. And on the pediment, on the bottom, just below all those, the top of the walkway where the pillars come up, there are words, these words: Oklahoma, Montana, Arizona, North Dakota, Georgia, Tennessee. Half of them are Indian names. Then there's New York, New Jersey. Some are Spanish. The names of my states. And the completely austere and solemn monument. I wasn't going to give a talk about patriotism, but I slipped into it, forgive me. It was part of how I came to give this talk, is what I was trying to explain. And I started with Chiang Kai-shek in World War II. Let me get now, and I'll try to, and now I have to be aphoristic, or you have to be patient, I run over my time. But don't all say yes. Okay, so I burrowed in history. I loved it. I used to go to the toy store and buy model ships. My dad was in the Navy. I was dying to get a USS Arizona, and Revell made one, the one that was blown up at Pearl Harbor. My grandmother kept my drawings. I must have drawn the attack on Pearl Harbor, I don't know, 10 times or something. I got Jane's Fighting Ships. That's a reference book for naval things. Appleby will know this. Jane's Fighting Ships. I had like a 1950-something edition, or late 50s, with pictures of the Swedish Navy and our ships, of course, and I would draw them. When I was in that same period, the first commercial war game came out. I mean, you buy it in a box, and it's a map and pieces, and Avalon Hill was the name of the company. It was Gettysburg. Then they made another one with a hex grid for the movement of the pieces, which is, by the way, the thing to do, because if you go diagonal, you go 1.414 times as far as you go straight, right? and that makes the movement unrealistic, whereas hexagons pack much more evenly. So a hexagonal board is what you want for war games. If you figured that your armored unit can move 10 spaces, you want to move 10 spaces that are more or less equal for all directions, hexagonal grids. I have in my garage still, I think, some rolled up hexagonal blank grid paper. Why? Because I made my own games, wrote my own rules. I invented 2 distinct Waterloo games. I read William Schreier's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. If you've ever seen it, it's about this thick. When I was 12. My high school history teacher, I'm a junior high school history teacher, wouldn't believe that I'd done it. My mother was really angry. um, I've been to Gettysburg and Antietam and so on. And I walked the field at Waterloo to see what it was like. Saw the Huguenot chateau where the French threw their troops away against finally some of the British Guards units. I've been there. When we were in Germany, we visited churches and cemeteries, almost only. I didn't go to many art museums, few. And we would, in the cemeteries, I would look out. It makes me cry. The number of German soldiers, one after another, from the Great War. Just, it's like as far as you can see, it's white crosses, one after another. So that's me and my history of being interested in history. That's the boyhood chapter. I can't resist telling you that the Avalon Hill Company sponsored a war game, national war game championship, and I got into the final round against their chief executive and designer. We were playing Africa Corps, and I beat him. My degree is in the history of science. We do a moderate amount of secret history here in our curriculum, if you think about it. When I graduated from St. John's, which has a very similar curriculum, I had all these books. I'm very glad I kept them. If you're selling your books at the end of the year, don't be cheap, save them. You'll be glad you have them. And then Kathy and I are married, we have an apartment, right? And so what do we do with all these books? How shall we arrange them? Well, I arranged them upon a little reflection in chronological order. We talk, Descartes actually is the first one to say this, we talk about the great conversation, how the authors argue with and converse with each other and it develops. That's a kind of historical thought. So anyway, I arranged them that way, and it was eye-opening. It made a difference to me that Bacon wrote before Descartes. Some things fell into place that hadn't fallen into place before. Now, I'm not saying the first thing you should do at Thomas Aquinas College or at St. John's is say, okay, now we are reading the Greeks in the freshman seminar, and this one comes before that one comes before the other one, and they're all related to the plague in the following way, and the chronology is Homer, blah, 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 blah. And once you've understood Greek culture, now you can suffer some Homer. Well, that's a caricature, right? But that's a wrong way to read. You want to let Homer speak to you directly. And a lot of the books will give their own context if you read them carefully. That's harder with some than it is with others. But, Aristotle mentions that it pains him to disagree with his teacher, Plato. You don't have to have somebody say on a cheat sheet, Plato had a student named Aristotle. They were both great philosophers. Aristotle will say a little something about Plato, and you can begin to get a sense of what he wants to say, what their relation was. Let me be more pious about that. You get the relation between a great thinker and teacher and someone who studied with him. And it's a beautiful relationship. So you can, that's in the book, it's in the text for you. Other cases, not so much so. Okay, so here's a history of colleges observation for you. We are not the child of St. John's College, but we're sort of, I don't know, the stepson or the first cousin once removed or something. There's a very close relationship between the two colleges. We still use some of their manuals. I'm going to be using Peter Calcavige's On the Measurement of Tones this year. Some of the better translations are from people at St. John's or friends of St. John's, the Allen Bloom Republic, and so on. And you have tutors who were there. Mr. Coughlin taught there, Mr. Collins taught there, and I was a student there and taught there for a year. That's a good relationship, and it should be cherished. We sometimes get fine lectures from them, too. There's a lecture on history by one of the great tutors at St. John's, Jacob Klein, which is kind of negative on history and liberal education. It's an interesting lecture to read. We produced a similar statement, Mr. Coughlin wrote it. I was hoping he'd be here so I could check things with him, but in any event, I'll see him someday. In which he sort of defends that we don't do much history either. And the argument is very similar to the one in Jacob Klein's lecture. Well, that's not surprising. We agree about some things. The two communities do. I want to say, as an amateur historian, that's a little outdated. And the reason is, you'll find this in our readings in Nietzsche. There's a period in which history aspires to be the architectonic science, practically wisdom. And Nietzsche writes a polemical text called on the, what is it called? There's a new translation of the title. It used to be called Use and Abuse, but now I think it's, anybody remember? On the something and something, advantage and disadvantage, I think that's what it is, of history for life. Now, meaning that's not history like the past, but study of it, the academic subject. And I was in a history department, history of science department, and there were some of the things in that department that I hated with a perfect passion, I got really mad about, and some things were wonderful. When I thought they were making history explain everything, as though Greek culture explains Ptolemy, simply, something like that, I would get really mad. So I would take out my copy of that polemical book by Nietzsche, Advantage and Disadvantage of History for Life, find one of the passages on the disadvantages and read it out loud to my wife. It was one of the early forms of my late in life habit of ranting. Now, there's no better ranter in our tradition than Friedrich Nietzsche. So I didn't make it up on my own. I would just read her those passages. And after a while, I'd blown off steam, and then I could go back and actually look at Ptolemy's theory of the moon or something. Get some good work done. We don't need that inoculation quite so much here. Partly, history is just diminished in prestige. You look at the news, I look at a lot of academic news, university and college news and so on, and you can see, I'm going to have to fuel up again here, you can see that the history majors are decreasing, some places are dropping it altogether. It's not a good field to go into if you want a job with your degree. And it's also become very subjective and very ideological. And people talk about the narrative. The history always involves a narrative, and the narratives are not entirely, but pretty largely kind of woke. And here's my new minted PhD in how it was that Hopi lesbians were prevented from becoming prosperous under the Spanish. I guess right? Excuse me, that bit of an overstatement. It's not entirely an overstatement, right? History was not that central before the 19th century either. not in formal education, not in university curricula. It rises into a high condition together with some very interesting historical work in the 18th and especially 19th centuries. Tocqueville is one of those people. Although, look at this, Tocqueville. Now, what university did he teach at? None. History was written by men of letters or statesmen, people, amateurs. The academic discipline didn't really grow up until first in Germany and later in the rest of the world it became something. As it did, the way history looks at the whole secular world, the whole, well, really the religious world too, but anyway, it looks at a whole. Anyone who looks at a hole for a while, I don't mean one in the ground, but that kind of hole. Anyone who does that begins to think that maybe what he's looking at can be understood in the way he's looking at it, whether it's atoms and void and material causation or whatever. This is a little dangerous to say, but the workings of divine providence. I say that's a little dangerous because I think there are people in this community who think that it is the way to look at history. And you might say St. Augustine looks at it that way. Now, he has the advantage of working very closely with Scripture, which does endeavor to explain, but not systematically. It presents to you God at work in time with the chosen people and the great turn of the ages. The Scripture will let you survey that, and Augustine will have that in mind. He spends time on it a lot. It's formative, but maybe not the only formative thing. It's really hard to say what divine providence intended until the end of times, don't you think? Did he intend the murder of the Jews under the Nazis? In a way, I want to say, yeah, he intends everything. Shall there be evil in the city and I not have done it, is a line from Isaiah. What did he intend? Did he intend injustice? Can't say that. What was the plan? I think I just heard Hank Williams sing this on my computer at home. Farther along, you know the song? Farther along, we'll all understand it. Farther along. Oh, I won't sing more, but we'll know why. There's a certain amount of comfort, resignation to ignorance that you have to do with providence, isn't there? Doesn't it seem a little hubristic to say, oh, yeah, I can see what happened there? Now, good people do it, but they usually tend to say, I can see what happened there. And usually what they have in mind is there's some extraordinary good that happened. It's really hard to account for by a normal collection of causes, and yet it happened. They'll do that, I think. Benedict XVI, maybe when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, wrote that way about the blend of Athens and Jerusalem. That the church spreads into a world in which the works of and inquiries of reason were cherished and flourishing. By the way, a little bit of a dark cloud on that. One of the things I learned in graduate school in a course, not philosophical, and it actually led to my lecture on Lucretius in part, is that when St. Paul and the others talk about the wise of this world, if you go to TAC or St. John's, you're going to think, who are you going to think of? Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, maybe. I don't know. I wouldn't. In a way, or maybe Cicero. I don't know. Well, in the first century, when Paul is writing, the Platonic and Aristotelian schools are in the tank. The commentaries on Aristotle and Plato, the Neoplatonists and the Aristotelian commentaries, later and earlier, and mostly later. The Romans they think they have philosophers. What they have is babysitters for their adolescent sons, who are trying to teach philosophy as a way of life. You know, they're kind of splicing into Roman firmness, courage, and martial capacity some of the maxims of the Stoics, and they produce fruit in figures like Marcus Aurelius. But the first century AD is not the century of four great schools of philosophy. It's two schools of house slaves taken from Greece who are instructing boys. Maybe some enlightened family girls too, I don't know. But now that's a broadly painted picture, and there are exceptions and so on. I think it's helpful to know that when you're reading St. Paul. It's helpful, among other things, because when you get to St. Augustine, and he praises Plato a lot, you might say, well, that's odd, because I thought St. Paul said all those guys were just sterile. You know, that's the wisdom of this world. Go a little further, and there's more than one revival of a close alliance between Platonism and Christianity. There's a school in England in the 16th century of Christian Neoplatonists in England. So those things are worth knowing. Now, I know I've exceeded my time. I want to get to something much simpler and briefer, I hope. I was going to title this talk, and I'll baptize it now. It's a late convert. The role of the knowledge of history, or the place of the knowledge of history, in the well-educated human person. Now, the well-educated human person does not come out as a finished product at the end of high school, or at the end of college, or at the end of graduate school, or professional school. The well-educated human being is never a finished product. That's in part why we say to you, and now I'm talking to the students, I hope you take it to heart, that we're making a good beginning here. So I immediately have to distinguish the ages of man when I talk about the place of the knowledge of history in the well-educated human person, all right? I'm going to do just three, which is too simple. But like from, practically from when you can speak to, roughly 15 or so. And then the next period is from 15 through your formal education, let's say, depending on the person, through about 25 or so. And then the rest of it is the rest of your life until you get old and toothless and can't read and stupid, which is what I'm afraid of, because I have all these dental problems. And people are starting to tell me I'm kind of stupid. And I know I'm having seeing problems and hearing problems. And so that's one reason I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to give you what I could before I disappear. Not that I feel like I'm going to disappear tomorrow. Far from it. I'm planning my music classes for tomorrow. But I am 77, and it's a good Christian thing to look ahead to the fact of death. It was always recommended. Memento mori. So here we go, these three ages, all right? The child is in the stage where he's curious, and I'll speak of the well-brought up and happy child and not the one in miserable circumstances, okay? He should love what's around him. He should love his place, The West Virginians that should, sing Mountain Mama along with John Denver. Um, Almost heaven. I should be singing California, Here We Come, and so on. And Michigan state motto is, I forget it in Latin, but it's something like, if you seek a pleasant peninsula, look around you. So you should love your own. You should love your neighborhood. You should love your own school friends. You should love your own people in parish. If you're in a children's choir, you should love to sing with those children. You should love that choir director. And you should love your country. And that doesn't mean that you can't notice that the choir director gets a little snappish sometimes, or that the tenors are always hitting the wrong note. You know that joke, Sean? The choir sounded so bad that even the tenors noticed. That's because you guys get the spicier parts, right? It's at least in tonal harmony, you do. So what should they know? Well, they should know. They should watch Fess Parker play Davy Crockett, and hear him in a kind of solemn voice say, for his advice, "Be sure you're right, then go ahead." They should read. Is it Genevieve Foster wrote those The World of books? The World of George Washington, The World of Abraham Lincoln. They're wonderful books. They're about 80 years old, or not quite 60, because I had them as a child. Well, I mean, it's the world in the days of George Washington. You see the goofy hairstyles the French aristocrat ladies had. There's one of them where she's got a model frigate surrounded by girls and things like that. But they're pious, civic piety. And you can have a few bad guys in there too. You should teach the children to sing America the Beautiful, and this is my country, land of my birth, various other songs in school assembly. You should do that. You should try to tell them at the 4th of July it's not only about picnics and fireworks and so on. They're getting the national story about itself, and it's going to be overly sunny. But the first thing you should do, you should support your natural love for what is familiar. I know there's a controversy with J.D. Vance and some Catholics about his argument that you sort of start with loving what's closest and move up, and the country is close to in its own way. Oh my God, you don't love people, whatever. I think J.D. Vance was basically right about that myself, and traditional. That doesn't mean you don't care for the stranger, and in some circumstances even die for him. Anyway, but that's the way it should be, I think. It's the way I was brought up, so I know it. I weep for the children who were early on taught, oh, here's everything wrong with your country. That's just stupid. That's like learning caricature before you learn figure drawing. Do I have to expand on that? You draw a decent looking face. You don't draw someone with disfigurement, not first. And if you want to mock people, well, okay, you can. There's some great political cartooning going on. We've had some art graduates do some pretty good caricatures over the years. One even was published. I mean, a lot. So sure. Listen, you can't have Sesame Street's version of Little Red Riding Hood without Little Red Riding Hood. You have to know, it isn't even funny unless it's obviously a twist. And I'm for all that stuff. I love that. It's great stuff, right? But it's saying you want that all the time is saying like you want to eat I don't know what, Tabasco or cinnamon all the time. You're eating spices. You're not eating food. You're, the food should be the billy goat's gruff, you know, and the three little pigs and that kind of thing. Then you can make fun of it, and it's fun. You know? Okay, that's stage one, right? When you go into your education, now here's the problem. History is too darn big. What do you want to do with your, when you're a parent, what do you want to do with your 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old young Christian and citizen? What should he study? You don't want to just have shallow knowledge of everything. That's no good. Can he be an historian? Now I'm going to enter, that's the third stage I'm going to talk about a little bit. And it's really maybe off on the side as the fourth stage. Can he be an historian? Now you get these schools that like to do projects and they say, you know, investigate this, that, and the other thing. I had a book report to do on reclaiming the desert in Israel when I was in 7th grade, maybe. And I just, you know, kids that age are, I just took things from a Scientific American article and cut out some pictures and parroted whatever was in that article. By the way, it made me love the Israelis. What they have done with that unproductive, barren, shouldn't be barren, but anyway, it was, land, it captures my admiration to this day. So I learned something from that, I guess. But I didn't learn anything about the complex arguments about who owns that land and how to draw its boundaries, and are there long-term problems with irrigation having to do with salt in the soil, you know, and so on and so forth. The 100 controversies on that topic that I could have gone into, right? I'm 11 or 12 or something. I'm not going to do that, and shouldn't, I guess I want to say. Now, one of your sons wrote a very fine research paper, actually, Mr. Collins, on whether the Union or Confederate cavalry was better in the Civil War. And he did a bit of real historical research, a bit. Well, you're not doing historical research when you read Gibbon. You're not doing historical research when you teach Gibbon. Or really even when you read the Supreme Court decisions, Cornerstone speech, and Lincoln's speeches in, what is that, senior seminar now or junior? Junior. Mr. Hartman selected some of those things. There's a chronology of the controversy over Kansas. He's, if anything, the historical author, or they are the characters themselves, Lincoln, Douglas, Alexander Stephens, and so on. Are you studying the buildup of the political forces that led to secession and Civil War? Do you think you are? You're not. You're reading other historians, or selections made by historically literate people. That's what you're doing. Now, as you get older, there's a fork in the road. This will turn it into four things, okay? You could major in history and learn the tools of the craft. Let's take the area that most attracts me, military and statesmanship, history, those fields. All right, so you now want to know, why was the vote on the 14th Amendment the way it was? You could read some other guy who had written about that. You could read 10 guys who had written about that, right? Well, that's not historical research. You're still reading historians. You're reading other people's research. Research means you go back to the little library in Nowheresville, Indiana, where one of those congressmen's papers were kept. And you find that he has a diary. And it's in that same library. And you dig it out, and you see the letter he wrote to his brother John and a couple of letters to his wife about how he's conflicted on the question. Then you find out, was he a Methodist? Had he been a Republican before the war? Um, what was his father's business? What circles did he travel in? And then you do it again, and again, and again, for whatever issue it is you're looking at. Get a good modern historian of, say, the debates about slavery, or even just a military campaign, and look in the back where the bibliography is, and look at the footnotes. If you've got a good one, you will be, I don't know, disgusted, amazed at the number of footnotes. And they're from the diary of Jonas Q. Caldwater, who was with the 42nd Massachusetts. And this is from his description of the Battle of, whatever, Spotsylvania Courthouse. And the chapter that you go back to the chapter where you found that footnote, and a good writer for you, not a good researcher. He's a good researcher too. Not writing for other researchers. They can use his footnotes, but to help them do the same kind of thing. But for you, what you want is somebody who did all that work or had his graduate assistant do it. Right, David? Am I right about this? And then chooses the most informative ones, and then weaves together an account of the battle, whatever it was, and put those in for vivacity, or maybe to correct a certain historical error some other people have made. Was Joe Hooker drunk at Chancellorsville? Well, you look at if you have them, the papers of his staff and subordinate commanders and one thing and another. It doesn't matter that some Confederate apologist said he was, or some Union apologist said he was. One of the things a liberal education does is it helps you see what is trustworthy and what is not. Or as Aristotle says, it enables you to have a fair offhand judgment of the teachings or writings of the experts. You're not up to the level of the experts, but you can see a fake expert. You can smell a rat. And conversely, you can say, this makes sense. It makes sense with other things I've read and so on. That's the kind of historical reading that you will do for the rest of your life. I recommend that you do it. There are subfields if you're not like me and really, really love military and political history. I want to name the author of one of them, and then I really must stop. I've gone way over my time. I knew I had too much to say. Sorry. Tocqueville. Tocqueville is not, think of his American book. Yeah, there's a little about the early history of New England. Is there anything about the Revolutionary War as a war? Is there anything about the fights in the Constitutional Convention so that you begin to get a sense of how that went? What's the story of that series of events? It's a different kind of history. You might almost call him, one of two things. He wants to think of history. History of what? What story are you telling? He's writing a diagnosis of the American people. Isn't that what he's doing? It has certain themes that are crucial to him. The importance of religion in who the Americans are. That's one. The influence of the land. The influence of what we understand to be the right relation between the sexes. Role of marriage, role of women. How we bring up our children. So you might also say in another way, he's kind of the first sociological historian. He's looking at society, and a key word for understanding Tocqueville is customs. Okay, now the French book, The Old Regime and the French Revolution, is even a better example. He wants to show you that the French Revolution was almost inevitable because of the decayed state of the old feudal order. And to do that, he strings together important observations. By the way, if you let's see, has anyone here read it yet? Any student? Is it in the senior year? Senior year. Well, I'm just going to confess, Americans are not very good with languages, and I'm not. We generally are monolingual, even in our reading. I can work my way through things in Greek, in German, in French is just English with a bad attitude. Latin. Anyways, so that book is hard. And why is it hard? All the offices and taxes and laws are things that we don't have the equivalent words for in English, and we don't have experience of them. It's a foreign governmental system. It's a profoundly foreign governmental system with people like intendants and what do they call those? Anyway, all right, Tocqueville went through endless, boring reports from bureaucrats in order to form his judgments. And there's some things in the appendices where he mentions some in more detail. Tocqueville is a researcher. He embodies the early stage of modern research history. Now, he's also a genius, so he has an ability to synthesize it. To put all this together, your children should be taught to love the country they are from. It's their own. As they get older, they will begin to read more difficult things and see problems and richer things. And they'll begin to say, I want to understand why all this happened. At that point, you're concerned with causes, and that's appropriate. You mustn't think that your first look at the causes is the answer to everything. You can go further in your formal education, studying such things. You have to be careful because the historian's craft, has been fragmented, poisoned by ideology, and devalued all at the same time. So it's tough to know just how to do that. I would say, you go to Dallas or Hillsdale, maybe. I don't know. There's some places, even some of the Ivies still have really good teachers of history, but you have to be careful. It makes a difference who you study with and what you study. Okay, then, unless God has struck you with his curse or gift, don't think about being a researcher. It's a vocation. It's a full career. Learn maybe how to do something, how to figure out something like William's good little piece of research on cavalry value to the Union and Confederate armies over the course of the war. Okay, maybe you can handle that at an amateur level, yeah. But read with the wisdom, discernment of an experienced person the great historical work that's being done right now. And now this will be the most encouraging thing I'm going to say. We are in a golden age of the writing of history. The opening of archives, the analytical tools that are available. I'll tell you one last story, okay, that illustrates this. It's not of a professional historian. There is some nut, some guy who's struck by the curse or blessing of really caring about the history of the Army of Northern Virginia in the Civil War, okay? And he's trying to find out what the numbers were, what their losses. Now there's a particular reason he's doing that. As the Confederacy falls apart, their records get a little spottier. So you've got people's estimates of the size of Lee's army. The conclusion of his research is it was bigger than people thought, and the replacements were bigger than people thought. And this maybe it doesn't diminish Lee's reputation, but it increases Grant's. There's a common picture, Grant the Butcher had a big sledgehammer, 120,000 men, and ground them into dust. End of story. That's malarkey. It's much more complicated than that, and the Southern armies were stronger. How did he find this out? He looked at the official records of the Confederacy, and this is one of the first places how he found it out. And there was a gap for this region of Southwest Virginia. The reports are like where the regiments were raised, and they were raised locally. So there's like there was a regiment of Harvard boys in the Army of the Potomac. If you know anything about the history of the Civil War, there's a lot of localism involved in the recruitment and behavior of the armies. So there's nothing from this place. Now, the newspapers were not, nobody was worried so much about spying in the Civil War. The newspapers gave casualties by name. Local newspapers, places that don't even, little villages that don't even exist or have a newspaper anymore. So one place historians go is to the newspapers. But the newspaper records for this region of Southern Virginia, Southwest Virginia, were gone. The paper was out of existence and nobody knew where they were. They have a club of these historians. Most of them are not employed in universities. They're just crazy people who work on these questions. Is this a great country or what? This also makes me love the human race, that there are people with that kind of weird dedication. And then they want to share it, right? So this guy gets published by Louisiana State University Press when he gets his work done, and it's first-rate work. But it's not coming out of the universities, history departments. One of these people at one of these reunions says, or these get-togethers, says, there's a woman in that area who just died, and I think I heard that she had like a cedar chest with all the back issues of that newspaper. And the story was true, and he went down there and filled in the gaps for those regiments in Lee's army. Is that crazy or what? It just tickles my fancy. So now, could some crazy person make up that story? I guess. I've read enough of this guy's writing to say, no, this guy is responsible. How do I know that? I don't know. I'm not stupid. I'm 77 years old to have some experience of the world. I can tell a crank from a tire. That's old stuff for cars, sorry. Anyway, I can tell X from Shinola. And this guy's good. I just can see it. He's really fair and careful. He writes well. This is a good one. So that's altered somewhat my view of Grant's plan and the results in the so-called Overland Campaign, 1864-5. That's important to Americans because we have this poisonous myth of the lost cause of the Confederacy, how they were always outnumbered, that it wasn't really about slavery in any way, and this has come to blows in recent times over the monuments. Removal of the Confederate monuments on Monument, is that what it's called? Monument Avenue in Richmond. Well, the history of that is a disgruntled couple of generals starting a society, the Southern Historical Society, and glorifying Lee beyond what he deserved, and partly in order to diminish Grant and partly in order to make the Southern cause look romantic and wonderful. And one result of that was they put up all these Confederate statues. They did not put them up right after the war. They start late in the Jim Crow period and well into the 20th century. And there's one general there, a great general, who got no monument anywhere. He commanded Louisiana State Militia during Reconstruction after the war. They were largely black troops. There was terrorist violence by the whites in Louisiana in those days. There was even with the use of cannon. There were the commander of the militia after the war, he had been in the Confederate Army, became a Republican. And there is not a single statue to him in the American South to this day. Who was he? Old Pete, James G. Longstreet, whom Lee called my old war horse, who commanded the 1st Corps in the Army of Northern Virginia. He betrayed the unrepentant, what's the word for it? Incorrigible? There's another word for it. What do we call the Palestinians? Irredentist, that's the word. We'll never forgive, we'll never forget. We were right all along. Attitude that was a powerful strain in the history of the Civil War after the South had lost, after the Grant administration roughly, after the end of Reconstruction. That's worth knowing. It's worth knowing if you want to think about the civil rights movement in the 20th century. It's worth knowing if you want to know where there was violence in Charlottesville and Virginia just a couple of years ago. It's worth knowing. However you judge it, whatever, it's a long and complex thing, and I'm just giving you the opener. So, if you can remember anything from this talk, remember that they kidnapped Chiang Kai-shek, and nobody ever made a statue to James Longstreet. And those are a couple of things you ought to know. Okay, thank you for your patience. I'll understand perfectly if is it dinner time already? If you have no questions and just want to head up and out, I'm at your service. And once again, thank you for your indulgence.